Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Rena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started. You're back. Woohoo! Did you have a nice little break from this closet studio?
No, I missed you.
I know. I missed you too, but we had some good people and I was excited to get out on the road and talk to other people, but I am glad to be back.
Well, and no one disappointed. I loved every single one of those, gleaned great tips from all of them. So thank you to each of y'all. Dr. Jones, Dr. Marr.
Yeah, we had some good, you suggested some good people, and I feel like we got a good little taste of other offices, other practice owners out there. But we're back today together, and despite the fact that you and I were just laughing our heads off about silly things.
We had a lot to catch up on. We both needed our ab workout. We were giggling like fools for
too long.
For too long.
So, despite that little intro to before we started recording, we're talking about stress today because I actually reached out to you earlier this week and was just like, man, every client that I'm talking with is just under this insurmountable stress, it feels like. And you and I were kind of brainstorming things that we could do to help, but we really wanted to focus this episode on how stressful it is to be a practice owner, but also some things that we want to make sure our listeners are doing to protect themselves from undue stress. So any thoughts before we dive in on this?
Well, no, because again, you and I hadn't talked much in these last couple of weeks because we weren't meeting to podcast because you were rendezvousing and I was doing nothing, y'all. So just sitting here to my own self in my own little bubble. But then you reached out to me, like you said last week, and I said, so how is everything going? Like how? And I think you'd had a pretty heavy day. It was midweek. Mm-hmm. And I think your week was pretty heavy from a couple of the clients you said that really were, you could tell were struggling, I guess. And from the way you described them, tell me if I'm wrong, it wasn't struggling with, I mean, it was nothing new. It's the same stuff we're all struggling with. And that's part of running a business. So I guess to me, I was like, did anything different happen? Like, can you tell me, obviously you don't tell me about who your client is or what the details are, but I think just what you kind of indicated was that they just seemed like they were at a burnout point. So I was asking you some questions. And I know one thing that you suggested or you were throwing out there was maybe we need to, managing dental or what are we called? Managing dental drama? Whatever the name of our podcast is that you're listening to right now. Sorry, it's been a little bit. Dental drama, because I call it dental drama.
Dental drama,
but, okay,
yeah.
Managing dental drama. Woo! So like you were suggesting, like we've got listeners, across the country. So maybe we set up some support groups. Yeah. And I think for me, my comment to that, and I didn't want to shoot down an idea, but I was like, well, would I as a listener reach out to another listener? No, I wouldn't. I think that would just add to my frustration, and I don't know that I have the time to do that and all that. So I think that's where you and I were trying to brainstorm and go, how can we help or what can we do? And short of, suddenly this spaceship arrives chock full of ready to go RDAs and RDHs. complete with emotional intelligence and low pay demands, and willing to work 7 days a week.
Right.
I don't think you can really help me with a lot of the issues that we have. And of course, make patients suddenly want to pay their bills.
Yeah.
So really what can we offer? So is that, I think I'm just kind of repeating what you just said, but.
Well, I think it's important to know that you and I are constantly thinking about what we can talk about to support our listeners. And I just had, we haven't talked in weeks on the podcast. And so I think I was hitting this moment where I was asking myself, are we doing enough to provide support? And as you and I talked through things, I knew that little support hubs weren't necessarily going to fit everybody's need. And to be honest, managing stress is an individual task. It's being aware of how stressed or how burnt out I am, and it's trying to prevent it in any way that we possibly can. And so while support groups might help a few people that need to commiserate with somebody else, at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that we can do just individually. And most of the time, what we do to reduce our stress is individual. And so as you and I talked, we felt like it was a really good idea on this episode to remind people what they can be doing individually to protect themselves from burnout. I don't know that we can completely prevent ourselves from stress. Stress is a normal part of everyday life, but how can we keep that stress from absolutely sucking every ounce of energy out of us? So one of the things you and I talked about that I think is so important is having a good support system, and developing that support system takes time. This is not an instantaneous overnight, now I've got these people that are rooting for me, but we feel like one of the best places to start looking for that support system is actually within the practice and the team members that you have. I feel like we may have lost about a third of the listeners with that statement right now, because they're like, my team? Are you joking me? But let's talk about that concept a little bit.
Well, and I actually, and maybe this is what you're saying, but to me, it's a separate, because we need our support system, because there's things that our team just isn't going to understand. And so that's where, for me, that's why I have you, because I feel like there's things that I can talk with my associate about that he'll get it because we're in the same boat, but I couldn't have that same conversation with my manager.
Right.
But I can talk to my manager about some things that I couldn't talk to my RDA about, right? So, and then there's things that I talk to you about that I can't talk to my associate about. So it's like we all have our network of people. And if we don't have that, then that's one thing that we absolutely do want to get. And that's where I kind of go and say, hopefully you're not on an island and shutting yourself off. I mean, I know time is really difficult to make the time. I don't personally Facebook and such, but I know my husband has said, he's like, it's like I used to before Facebook really hit it off. Like say 10, 12 years ago, he's like, people would still return calls. You would still count on that, or we would all still plan to go. And I remember, and maybe kids got in the way, it might have been, but first couple of years we were married, we would meet with friends across the country. And that just doesn't happen anymore, because I think people feel like they know about other people just because through Facebook. So yeah. I think that for this newer, younger generation, that probably is something where maybe you don't necessarily, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is make sure you're not holding yourself up to where you don't keep in touch with your dental school friends or your college friends, high school friends, resident friends, whoever it is. Hopefully you haven't burned bridges. Yeah. I'm still really close with the guy I worked with before I started the practice. And I know he enjoys reaching out to me and talking. And it's, we haven't worked together in 12 years, but he's still a dear friend of mine. Now, I've got people that I've worked with that the bridges are burned. They can't call me for help because I won't give it. They burned it, right? So hopefully we've got listeners that aren't bridge burners. And if you are, please stop doing that, because we need each other, But I think what you and I were talking about was support on the team. And this came up kind of twice in the last 2 weeks. I was chatting with a doctor who, relatively new practice, couple of years old. And so she's got a really small team. And in that conversation, she's talking about how hard it is to get, a system going because she's had so much turnover. Well, her practice started after COVID. And I was like, well, that's norm. So don't beat yourself up about that. But, you've had one or two people with say 1.5 years of longevity, 2.5 years of longevity, and you've only existed for 3 years. So that's good longevity. Why are those people there? And I don't think it had ever occurred to her to think about that. I think to her, it was really you're there for a paycheck. But we all know we don't want that person. We can all get a paycheck, but why do we show up at work every day? Yeah. You know what I mean? So I think she had never thought about reaching out to her team as a resource for even building the practice or reaching goals together. So, again, I can't believe I'm the one talking about goals, because we just talked about how much I hate goal setting and all of that. But you have taught me something. So that's a huge credit to you, but because I was always anti-goal, or at least speaking the goal, or it's almost like I feel like if I say it, then am I jinxing it, or am I setting myself up for failure, or you know what I mean? So it's like, well, I'll just keep it in my head,
Right.
And then if it doesn't turn out that way, then
nobody has to know we didn't achieve it.
right, or it wasn't meant to be.
Yeah.
The forces said, and like I'm not a religious person, but the forces said, or some people are like, well, it wasn't God's will, or it wasn't so and so's whatever, you know what I mean? But in this case, I was like, well, why is that team member with you? Especially, it sounds like you've had a lot of turmoil.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, well, I could probably tell you she could probably get more pay anywhere. All of our employees could get more pay anywhere right now. But if they're with you, why are they with you? They like something about you, and maybe they see where this practice is going to go.
Yeah.
Why don't you get them hitch them to your wagon? You hitch yourself to their wagon.
Yeah.
And kind of say, what can y'all do with this place?
Yeah. And there's a lot of trust that goes into that. And I think a lot of people have had burned relationships in the past. And so they're protecting themselves from that potential. And I think turmoil kind of puts us, when we've got turnover constantly, oh, I can't trust anybody. And I get that. I do understand that to a certain point. But I think when that becomes our mindset, then we do become an island unto ourselves, and we don't have a team that we're connected with or depending upon in any way, shape, or form. And that can burn you out over time.
Well, and depending on somebody, I would say has always been my, I didn't want to get married because don't want to depend on somebody. Mm-hmm. I don't want to bring in an associate because I don't want to depend on you. I don't want an office manager because I want to, like I'm very fearful of that. Mm-hmm. And so, but again, it's one of those things you can't advance if you're going to let that fear get in the way. So am I going to get burned sometimes? Yeah. But have I had far more great experiences? Yeah, I have. And so I would just encourage everybody to kind of, if you've always thought of yourself as like, no, I'm here and the staff's over there, there's certainly a healthy balance to be had. And there are certainly boundaries to be had. But I would say, like, who are the people that you can see are like-minded in the practice and what they want out of the practice? For example, like for me, I have to go back to and say, what was my whole MO in starting the practice? Well, I was very happy in my associateship. The only reason I left is because we were ready to start a family. We didn't want to be in that small town. And so that has always kind of been my driving force. I was thinking about, you said it, and I kind of, it took me a minute to even mull over it, but I think a couple of podcasts ago you said something to me that was like, well, you what you want out of the practice and what you want out of life are married.
Yep.
And I guess they are married because that's what made the office born for me. At that point I was like, I've paid off debt, I just want to be a good provider and help people. Like, that's what I want to do. And so I didn't think I could have a family and run the way I was running as an associate. And so therefore the practice was supposed to allow me to be a mom and continue working my skill set. So a very different reason of why I started the practice. I think about another colleague of mine that I know, and she has been in private practice for, 10 plus years and just started her own last year. But why did she do that? It wasn't for the money. And she was tired of getting into these associateships where she would kind of get the garbage dentistry, kind of have garbage materials to work with, and that she wanted to do, certain cases the way she wanted to do them. Now, she was helping me in my office. We loved her. Like, really sad to see her go. I think she really enjoyed her time in my office. But at the end of the day, it wasn't a challenge that she wanted. She wasn't a pediatric dentist and didn't want to be one. She wanted to do beautiful general dentistry. She was very qualified, very skilled at all of that. And so she started her own. So all of that to say, like, going back to your why of what you started, I think is so important. Anyway, going back to then, but then who else is there that sees your why? And is your champion. And I think this colleague that I had talked to, again, that was kind of burnt out, has her practice for a couple of years, but I don't think she's close to anybody on her team. Yeah. And it's really hard when you're trying to steer this ship And you really are kind of like, you're on deck and everybody else is on like the bottom deck. So y'all are on the same boat, but God, it's lonely.
It is, and it's not healthy to be in the same place every day of the week with people that you're working with. Like, you have to work with them to get the job done, but internally you've got them completely blocked off because you feel like the risk is too great to get to know them and their goals, to incorporate them into your thoughts about the practice, your dreams about the practice. And like you said, I think there's a healthy boundary that we keep in place, but you got to feel like when you show up that you actually have a team, that we are all, like, you think about any sports team and the amount of time that goes into the practices that they have, the conversations that they have about how they're going to run this game, the video that they watch of their last 3 games and what they did right and what they did wrong. And that's a lot of togetherness and a lot of effort that goes into running a really good game. And I think we have to have kind of that same mindset. It can't be, I'm showing up to my practice and I haven't dialogued with them. Like, of course, we'll dialogue today as it goes, as the day goes. But as far as they don't know the strategy, they don't know the game plan, they don't know where we're headed, they don't know why we're headed in that direction. They just show up and they do the basics of the game that day. We're not going to get anywhere. And the key player, who is the dentist, none of that can happen without the dentist, is going to tire out because ultimately they're the Michael Jordan of the team that's trying to shoot all the baskets and make all the shots and make all the plays. And they feel this pressure to be the star. And you've got other people on your team that can really support in running a really good game. But that does take effort and time.
Well, and I guess there's that new thing now that they're doing with basketball, the interseason tournament thing. Mm-hmm. And LeBron last night just said, like, he was the MVP for that, but he's like, Anthony Davis, like, my husband's like, well, Anthony Davis was the MVP for last night's game.
Yeah.
So you can't do it all. Even LeBron James needs the people on his team to be there because the longevity's not going to be there.
Yeah.
And he's almost 40 and he's playing like he's 22, because he is surrounded by good teams and good support. And so I think that's just something that because I am a feeler and I need the people around, like, I need to be kind of liked by the people that work with me and for me. And I know not everybody has that. And a lot of people are like, I don't want to be liked because then I won't be taken seriously. Right. So I get all of that. But when I go back and I think about kind of the old school days of probably your dad's practice, the gentleman I used to work for, like any good practice, they were like family.
Yeah.
And they really kind of knew each other, relied on each other, trusted each other. And I know that's gotten even harder now post-pandemic when staffs are leaving and all of that. You're like, how can I build a relationship when you were only here for 2 months and then you left? So I get that. But are we trying? Or is it just totally transactional from the minute they walk in and here's your job and here's your this and there's what you did good and there's what you did bad and this is what we need. And that's that. I think that's where a lot of people are kind of missing the opportunity to get more joy out of their practice and get the support they need. So the silly example that I gave you that day, but that's what made us come up with this, where I was like, you know what? I think this is one thing that could be missing for a lot of dentists facing a lot of stress was we had our Christmas party. Was that last weekend? I think it was last weekend. And we went overnight. And it was, y'all, it was a lot of fun. And this will segue into our second tip here. But we had a lot of fun, but it was the first time, I would say, I think it was the very first time that I have really let loose at a Christmas party. I think I let loose earlier this year when I went to Greece with 3 of the people that I'm closest to in the office that have worked with me the longest. And I really just adore these women. I adore them. And so anyway, the 3 of them were going to be there at our Christmas party. And I think, we had a lot of food and liquor and music and just whatever. Well, we had a good time. We're driving back the next day. My associate's driving with me, and I was like, okay, well, what do you think? That was always my favorite part of going to parties was like the debrief afterwards. Like, I talked to these people, you talked to those people. What'd you glean? What I glean? What I missed? This is what you missed, right? Like we used to call it post-party gossip growing up. Like, okay, everybody, like my whole family would gather in. We're like, no, wait for her. She's not here yet, and well, okay, now everybody's brushed their teeth in their jammies. Okay, let's go over post-party gossip. Like, what happened? And so my associate was like, well, I don't think you're going to like to hear this, which I was like, oh, good Lord. Like, that's what we're starting with here. But I mean, good. He's like, well, I guess one person on the team kind of like disappeared at one point during the night. And so another coworker was like, where's so-and-so? And she went to go check on her and apparently came back and reported that that team member felt uncomfortable that the doctor she works for was dancing and drinking and having fun. And so part of me goes, I mean, that's fair, because you're going to have the equal number of employees that are like, oh man, my doctor is a normal person, is a regular person. Apparently I know Cardi B lyrics, which I don't even know I know, but apparently I was singing them. So my assistant's like, oh, you knew these lyrics. I'm like, okay, if you say so. I don't know lyrics to anything. I don't hear very well. But so I guess some people are going to love that, right? Yeah. But then you've got the equal subset that's like, no, that's like my teacher that's drinking and partying, and I'm not okay with that. So I don't think that in and of itself didn't hurt my feelings at all. Like, I get it. But then I'm lying a little bit because I am sensitive, and now I'm like, oh my God, what is everybody saying about me? What did I do? Did I do anything inappropriate? Did I say anything inappropriate? And so I got really paranoid there for a minute. And by the way, it turns out that no, I was just fine. Or if there was something, nobody has fessed up yet. But bottom line, I think like for me, for the next couple of hours, I was just kind of like in my own head going, damn it. Like, now we're going to come back to work, and like, is anybody going to take me seriously? Are people going to like, I just didn't know. And because I'm a feeler, I'm a worrier, I just kind of started thinking about all of that. And what kind of pulled me out of my little funk was the people that I was like, wait, I've got a core group of my team that knows me so well, so that if I did say something that I shouldn't have said, or if I don't know, but my core group has my back. And they did, because then I was texting them and I was like, hey guys, like apparently I made some people uncomfortable. Like, they're like, you didn't do anything. You were just having fun. But I think some people weren't expecting.
Right.
Because I guess I'm always so quiet and proper. I don't know.
And these are people that would tell you too, by the way.
Yes.
Like, if you did something, they would not lie to you about that.
Right. And so all of that to say, I felt so comforted knowing that I had some people, interior people, that had my back. Mm-hmm. And then that's when I asked you, I was like, do some of these docs that you feel like have been having stress, does somebody have their back? Do they feel like somebody has their back in the office? And your answer was no. Mm-hmm. And so I just thought that was interesting. That to me, like, that was, so yes, I have my exterior, I could ask my husband, but he wasn't at the party, and he knows a different me than the me in the office. Mm-hmm. And so who am I supposed to ask that to? Right. But these were people like my interior people in the office who have come to know me very well. I know them very well. And it was very reassuring that I had somebody. Or, so this time it was an office party, but there are times, if there's a parent that's like, you gave us a terrible treatment plan, all you wanted was our money. I know my team, and maybe not everybody, maybe some of the people that don't understand why we treatment plan the way we treatment plan, but I know my core group is going, no, if she planned it this way, there's a reason she planned it that way. Like, you're right. I'm looking at the x-ray and that doesn't look anywhere near the pulp. Why would she be extracting that? Why would she be doing a pulp and crown? But they're going to give me benefit of the doubt. I think that's kind of, maybe that's the point. Do you have somebody in the office that's going to cheer you on? Or if you make the unpopular decision of now you're going to be open on Christmas Eve next year because Christmas falls on a Wednesday. By the way, Christmas falls on a Wednesday next year, y'all. Like, that's going to suck for the whole planning of when we should work. You and I were talking about that just a minute ago. It's a doozy. But if we decide to work Christmas Eve next year, part of me goes, oh, the whole office is going to revolt. And then I'm like, no, my couple of key people are going to be like, she has thought through this. Mm-hmm. If she needs us to work, we're going to work. So do you have that? Have you fostered those relationships? That's kind of where I'm going with this.
Well, and I think that's such a key question. Have you fostered those relationships? Because I think sometimes we want that level of loyalty without investing the time and energy that it takes to get that. And I kind of equate that to like a outside of the office relationship. Like my husband, we still, 20 years later, still have to put in effort into our relationship. And there was effort before we got married. There's a whole heck of a ton of effort before we got married. And then afterwards, even more effort. So we we make time to make sure that our relationship is still strong, the same principle applies in our offices. We can't expect to have good relationships with our team members without investing the time. And it can't be one-sided. Like it makes so much more sense if we take it outside of the office. But if I expected in my relationship with my husband that he was just there to serve me, serve my needs, make sure that I get what I want, make sure that our home runs the way that I want it to run, and that's that. That's your role in our relationship. And you do that, we're going to be fine. Well, that's a highly dysfunctional relationship, right? Like, obviously, he should get some benefit from me as well. And it does work the same way, differently, but the same concept applies within an office that, yes, your team members are there to make sure that the practice runs. Yes, your team members are there to make sure the patients are served. Yes, your team members are even there to serve you. But you also have an opportunity. And it's not just they get a paycheck, they should be happy with that and be quiet about it and move on. That's not the way relationships work, ever. Right? So we have to put in some of that time. And I know on an episode that's talking about stress, they're like, oh gosh, I can't even handle one more thing. But if you put in the time now, it will pay off in the long run to provide somebody on the team that has your back.
So then do you have an example of if somebody's sitting there going, what are you talking about? Spend time. Like, I got to go have lunch with this person. So like, what are some practical, like, what could you do, especially if you are, say, an introvert like me, or you're not a feeler, you're a very logical person. Like, what would you say would be a good starting point?
I would say start as simple as you can. So let's say for that introverted doctor out there that's like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Let's say you've got 3 team members on your team. Each month you meet over lunch, you take them out to lunch, or you bring lunch into the office and you spend lunch break with them, just one-on-one, just chatting, getting to know them, talking about life. And then maybe that leads to, how do you feel about the practice? Any thoughts, ideas that you have about the practice that you'd like to share? Can I share a few of my things? Like, simple.
Could you, or would you say this is not a good idea? Like, because for me, just the thought of that makes me go, I'm just going to throw up. Like, I don't want to do that. And at the most I would do it would be twice a year. And then that twice would probably actually end up only being once, right? Could I, like, maybe once a quarter, or like you said, once a month, like if we had kind of come up with 3 questions, like getting to know you questions, like, why dental? What is your favorite thing to do when you go home? And what is your favorite movie and why?
Yeah.
Like, just things like that.
Absolutely.
That allow you to, and maybe like if you have a staff meeting once a month, maybe everybody shares one thing, like, you know, Halloween that was just here. What's your favorite Halloween movie? Or what's your favorite Christmas movie? What's your favorite child? I think just things like that help you kind of like learn about somebody, something that you wouldn't have known otherwise.
And you put yourself into that too. So if they're answering questions about what their favorite movie is, so are you. Yeah. As the practice owner. And I think that's sometimes where we're like, oh no, y'all answer them and I'm not a part of this. No, you're a part of this. This is part of us getting to know each other. So I think that's absolutely a great idea. I think at some point there's going to have to be one-on-one dialogue.
True. And I think also the goals, like what are you wanting out of life? And I think that's one thing that, going back to that, the newer dentist, you know, I'm like, this team member's been with you for almost the time of the existence of your practice. Why is she there? And this dentist's like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's an opportunity missed. You need to like tap into, because you could throw more money at her, but a lot of people could throw money at her. What are you doing to make sure that she's there for a reason? And if you don't know the reason, you don't know how to continue to make that happen for her.
Right.
And then you're going to lose that person. So I think just something that basic, asking, you know, what are your goals?
Yeah. And this is a good time of year to ask about your team member goals. It could be a simple piece of paper that you pass out that has 3 questions on it. Like, hey, I'm really wanting to hear your reflections on this past year for 2023 from a practice standpoint. I want to hear what you're desiring out of 2024 personally and professionally. And then I'll schedule, 20 minutes over our lunch break to sit down and go over that with you, because I want, it shouldn't appear transactional. And maybe it has to start transactional, just like, got to make a plan, got to do it. I understand that. But your team member should feel like you're genuinely interested in their thoughts. And you should be genuinely interested in their thoughts because that perspective is helpful. Yes, you might be the most degreed person in that place. You are critical to that practice. But it's been rare that I've sat with team members that I haven't taken some little token away from. That was such a good thought. Or, man, that perspective was interesting. Or, she just makes me laugh. I just enjoy her. Even if they don't have the degree that you have, there's value that they bring. And their thoughts are important enough for you to be interested in them. Not just patronizingly listening to what they're saying, but actually caring about what they're saying. And keep in mind, all of this is to build a team that has your back, like you're talking about. Because I think when we put in that time, this stressful situation that you had with somebody on the team potentially being offended by something that you did, you had people within your team that you could access immediately for very honest feedback. And that honest feedback, if they had anything wrong to say, they would have provided it in a very direct way, but in a way that didn't crush you. Like, it would have been because they love you and they want to provide this feedback. That has taken years of development, and we have to start somewhere. So if we don't have that relationship with our team, or we're just like, oh, I'm too tired to even think about another person, well, then you're only going to get a certain amount out of that person. Just like in that scenario with my husband, if his whole world was just about serving me and my existence, over time, he's probably going to want to move on because that's not in any way benefiting him. So your team member is probably not going to buy in and be a long-term lifer if they don't feel like they're receiving something from the relationship.
And I will say, like, that relationship will still come to an end at some point. And you can't, like, I struggle with that. Yeah. Why should I pour all of this into? And I've come a long way in going, but that's still, like, whether I got a year or 3 years or 5 years, I'm still in a better place for having invested that time. Mm-hmm. Also for myself, like, I've enjoyed my time in my office more. Can I move on? Do we have time here? Can I move on to the...
Well, and yes, we do. One other thing. So I would say this whole tip is build your support system. We focused a lot on the team. Early at the beginning of the episode, we talked about building your outside of the team support system. And all I would say on that is build it with people that will be honest with you. Build it with people who you're not just going to sit there and complain and they're going to commiserate with you. That's not helpful. Sometimes we need somebody to just bellyache with, as long as that person can route it back to something productive. Your spouse is a great support. They should never be your only support. Never. It's too much for them, number one. Number two, unless they're in the dental field, they don't have the dental knowledge and the dental norms. And they're going to always see it from your perspective. Only from your perspective. And that is not a good sounding board when you need perspective. So your spouse can certainly be one, but you need to develop relationships outside of your spouse that are good and healthy. And if you don't have that, which I think a lot of people don't, you need to go find it. Even if that means having an uncomfortable conversation with the dentist down the street that you've never introduced yourself to, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so awkward. Just do it. Maybe they turn out to be a great sounding board. Maybe they don't. But if we put in the effort, then you've got, similar to how you had with your team, you had people you could reach out to right away. When you've got an issue that comes up, if you've spent time fostering relationships outside of the office, then you've got an immediate support group in place when you need it.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm going to segue us here a little bit. So the other tip that I thought of when you asked me this last week about stress and all of that, I think for me, the question that I had was, have any of these docs that you were talking about, have any of them had a vacation anytime? And I think when we think of vacation, we think about, 3, 4, 5 days, a week, 2 weeks, beach or mountains or wherever. And I don't know that it needs to be that. I'm just thinking, we're all pedal to the metal all the time. And then, of course, other things, my kid's soccer game, my this, my that, relatives in town. I mean, we all have that going on at all times. So do we pause long enough, even a night, even 2 days, to whether if it's like a staycation and you're hiding your phone, turning off all the TVs, and you're just going to sit in your pajamas all day long.
Yeah.
Have we done that for ourselves? Have we booked ourselves at the local Massage Envy or the, if you want to go fancier than that, like, have we done that for ourselves? And I think that that is super important. And that was the other thing that came to mind, again, from this Christmas party. We drove about 3 hours to stay in this cabin. And I tell you, even something that simple. And I'll tell you, I was stressed before going because I'm leaving my husband and my kids. We did it on a Sunday night, coming back on Monday, which meant I wasn't around to help get the kids ready for school. I wasn't around all day Sunday when that's the hardest time getting your kids, focused and sorry kids, weekend's over. Like, here comes Monday. Yeah. So I wasn't there for any of that rah-rah support for my husband. But we drove. And so we had, I think, 3 different cars of us going. And just the drive up. 3-hour drive, peaceful drive in the car. We get there. We're staying somewhere where none of us have stayed. That was a pretty nice place. We took our own food and drink. So there was some stress on me because, again, I was the one hosting the party. So I had to make sure there was enough food, enough drink, and sleeping bags and all that. In the end, it was just calm. Yeah. It was so nice. It was nice to be somewhere different. It was nice to be, even though we were around each other at work, but it was just a different environment to be around each other with. And then we drove back the next day, and half the team messaged me and was like, I didn't know how much I needed just a day away. And part of me was like, but are people going to be like, oh, I need a day away without my coworkers that I can't stand? It wasn't. It was like, that was so delightful. I love getting to see everybody outside of the office, chilling. Yeah. So that has rejuvenated us. We had such a good week this last week because everybody's so rejuvenated. We had an all-day emergency training on Wednesday for how to handle medical emergencies, blah, blah, blah. And the trainer at the end of the day was like, your team is so, they were so focused. They were asking good questions. They were like really here. And he's like, how do you get through emergencies? You've got to trust each other. And if you guys don't like each other and you're throwing each other under the bus or you don't know how to help each other and work together, he's like, I can tell your team works together very well. They were very seamless and very highest compliment to me. Like, I took that very personally. Like, I'm like, he didn't have to say anything. He doesn't know me. Right. And part of me was like, yeah, it's because we just had team building 3 days ago. Like, we all are high on each other right now. So maybe it's just the timing, but I never thought about that. Like, you're right. If we're going to end up in a medical emergency situation, you've got to have a team that's cohesive, that can communicate with each other. Yeah. And can help each other. And that just doesn't happen by itself. No. If you're waiting for that just to happen just because, oh, well, we all took BLS, we all know what we need to do. No. Mm-hmm. And this is like, so, and again, nobody in our office, he's like, but y'all would call out an answer, or you would say, go get the AED, or you would say whatever, but nobody was like snickering at anybody, yelling at anybody, snipping at anybody. Y'all all worked together very well. And I'm like, that doesn't just happen by accident. No, that's a lot of time that we spend fostering that. And I don't think people see it that way. Mm-mm. A lot of times they don't think, they think they're just doing a Christmas party because they have to. Right. They're just doing my
team will expect this. I must do this. But it is an investment. It is an investment of time together, trying to foster better relationships. You, as the practice owner, getting an opportunity to get to know your team members in different ways. And time away, I feel like the dental field has gotten a bad rap for this. I have talked with so many clients that are like, I will never do that. I will not invest like that in my team because somebody's going to leave the next day. And I get that. I really do get that hesitation. But sometimes you as the practice owner need to get away, even if it's with your team for a day in a different location. Maybe you're not investing in your team. Maybe you're investing in yourself. And if we change that perspective and thought, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to dive in and do it. And I'm going to hope and pray and really try to get out of this better communication with my team, better relationships with my team, for them to communicate better and to just treat them and myself to something that's unique.
Every time we have done that, there has never been a time I regret it. I always come back feeling refreshed. I learned something new about the team. I can't say enough. But even, and say you don't go with the team, but even, I guess to me, some of the docs you were talking about that didn't seem like they'd taken a break in a while, and now they're like, I'm so burnt out, I want to go away for a month. Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to be devastating to the practice in multiple different ways. can we go ahead and build in breaks and say this weekend, like say, for example, in Texas, MLK is a day that's closed. Is that nationally? Yeah, I don't know. I
think so.
Anyway, but I don't think all schools are always closed in MLK, but for us, we know MLK is going to be a beating because it's a day off of schools. So maybe the next weekend, I'm making sure that we're taking a 3-day weekend. Yeah. And maybe I'm driving down to Houston to go visit my sister. Yeah. And somebody asked me, like, what's in Houston? What do y'all do? I was like, nothing. And I don't want to do anything. Yeah. I want to wake up when I want to wake up. I have breakfast, and then I sit. Yeah. And my sister and I just chat. Yeah. Like, so we don't have to be doing something. I just think, or again, that staycation of where you're checking into a hotel down the street, even for a night. Are we taking a break is my point.
I think that's so important, and planning it. Because if you don't plan it, it's not going to happen. And I think so many times when I suggest this, there's all these lists of reasons why we can't. Oh, we feel like we can't because of X, Y, Z. And the way that I always look at it is that is an investment in yourself to make sure you can last, right? So I always talk about protecting the body and mind like it's our best dental instrument because it's the only one we have, right? And so we have to be able to invest in ourselves and we have to plan it. I want to give 2 examples just to encourage our listeners because I know production is like the main thing. I've got a client that this year decided he's going to, like every school holiday that his kids are out, he's closing the practice. He's a general family practice. And so he's done that. This was the first year. Every, like, spring break was closed. Thanksgiving break was closed. Like, anytime his kids were out, he was off. And his practice was up in production this year. Across the board, up in production. So this fear of, oh my gosh, like I'm off so much more this year than I was last year. Like the practice can't handle that. He was up. And we planned for that. We knew you're going to be out this, and this, so we need to raise that daily goal. We need to be doing this to make sure that we are, getting the numbers that we need. Another practice owner of mine took off. He had never scheduled time off. I mean, outside of random little like 4-day weekends or things like that. And so he closed down spring break week. He closed down a week in summertime. He closed down Thanksgiving week, and he closed down a week at the end of the year. 4 weeks. And the numbers that he needed to hit were higher than the year before based on his overhead. And he was like, "Ooh, I'm not sure that's going to work." And I'm like, "We will make it work." And he did. He accomplished that goal. So as long as we plan it and we know I'm going to be gone, even if that means shutting down the practice for 4 weeks out of the year, if that's what you need and every quarter you need to have a week off to rejuvenate, make it happen. And you just put it into the plan of then what do the rest of the weeks need to look like from a production collection standpoint to pay for that time off. So don't let the fears of the practice failing or my team, not being happy with me because we were close. Like, you just have to put all that aside and you have to decide what do you need and then just make it happen.
So I'm going to be honest with you. When you say that, that sounds great. It sounds reassuring. I'm happy with that. But if I didn't have you, I don't think I would know what to do different with the rest of the schedule to make up for the time for that. So luckily I have you, I can tell you this is my goal and you can say, okay, then this is what you need to do. For people that don't have you helping them with that, can you maybe come back and do a separate episode
sure can.
Giving us tips on what you would do? Like how would I, so for example, like you and I were dialoguing before this started today because something about Christmas break, blah, blah, blah. And I was looking at next year and that's where my husband was like, I was like, Christmas falls on a Wednesday. What do I do with that? Like, even if we then took Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off the 26th, but that would mean I have to travel on Christmas to come back. Mm-hmm. What do I do with this? And so, but you and I were sitting here going, okay, well, normally on breaks, we've started like we just pound it from 7 to 1, 7 to 2. We don't take a lunch. We pack it in. But maybe there are certain days that if we're going to take these days off, maybe these other days we're there 7 to 4 instead of knocking off at 1 or 2. And we might be working a Saturday or 2. Well, I haven't worked at a Saturday or 2 since I started the practice 10 years ago, but that may be what I need to do. But I'm planning that now so that I can still maximize the times that are busiest for us, right, but still not have to fight with every person in my office about being there over Christmas break, because the timing's going to is yucky.
Yeah.
But that's what you're talking about, is going, okay, if you're going to miss this time, then when are you open? But for a lot of us, I wouldn't know to do that or how to do that and get my team on board. And how do I know I'm doing it too much or too less, or what am I doing? So you'll come back and do another episode with some tips.
Yeah, I think that would be super helpful. And I think the main thing, maybe the main takeaway on this episode will be think about what you think you need. And maybe that's not even a vacation every quarter. I mean, that could be a young mom that has kids that she works 5 days a week and she has trouble figuring out the doctor's appointments. Great. Do you need a day off a month? Do you need a couple days off a month to be able to feel, I know because I work 5 days a week most weeks, that's hard for me. And a lot of times my husband, it gets to be the one to take them to their appointments. And so that's even one of the goals that I've made for me. No, 2024, you're going to at least have a day out of the month that you can take kids to appointments. It could be as simple as that. If that's refreshing and it feels like we've got some control, we just need to think about what it is we need. And then I'll come back and do an episode on how you make up for it in the practice. So,
awesome.
Well, thank you for talking with me about stress. I hope everybody will take away from this. Find your support system inside the office, build it. Outside of the office, go find it, and then start thinking about what you need as far as time away from the practice.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone, but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.